Hi, hello everyone. Welcome to another Wolfram Language Design Review, part of our Language Completeness and Consistency series. And I see some kind of complicated topics here. So let's dive into annotation.
Right.
So yeah, go ahead.
Right. So, I mean, this is something we've discussed on and off, and there was a request to uh, sort of um
Annotation Summit.
yes. And I'm not quite sure that this is that summit, but I figured we could at least you know try to focus a little bit on what exactly is it we're trying to accomplish. Um so
Right. I mean, the basic point is we have no generic method of having, an expression is an expression and it is what it is. And sometimes it is useful to have metadata that, you know,
Well, yes, but I sort of reject that description as a useful description. Right? I mean, right? If you look at the operations we've talked about, right? It's insert annotation, it's extract annotation. Great. So I have an annotation now. What do I do with it?
okay, but the
Uh,
other question is the presence of annotation. What we really want is sort of a computation layer and an annotation layer, data versus metadata. Because, let's say you have a graph and you've annotated that this node is pink, but you want to, I don't know, you want to do a graph union with another graph. Most of the time, you want to ignore the fact that node was annotated with pink. It does not mean it's different from the unannotated node in the other graph. You still union them together. See what I'm saying? So, I mean, in other words, I think that a defining feature of annotation is it's there as metadata, but it does not affect the computation that you do with the underlying object. Is that a fair statement or not?
I well, um,
So that's
uh,
obviously true for example, images where you have a point of, region of interest type tag.
Yeah,
But I'm not
I,
sure that should be
I, I
considered
don't,
an
I don't,
annotation.
I don't think that's actually true in general, though, right? Because if you give weights to your edges, right? I mean, that could be, uh, you
But
know,
maybe we shouldn't think of that as an annotation. I mean, maybe there's two classes of things. There's a class of things that affect computation, and there's a class of things that can affect visualization and those kinds of things, exporting, but not computation. Now, I admit that there is not a bright line. What's computation and what's not?
right. And for example, if you're talking about, graph unioning or whatever, right? If you're talking about pure graph theoretic operations, right, the weights are irrelevant. But if you're trying to solve a traveling salesman problem, then the edge weights absolutely do matter.
Hmm.
Should,
So,
by the way, Charles be here as well? Because I think a lot of annotations have started from graphs
Why
and
don't we invite him
geometry.
if we can get him?
I actually just he and Charles are in the meeting, and so they're not
Okay.
available right now.
Okay.
Okay. So that's a good point. I mean, your point is you never know when something is computationally relevant.
Right.
And so that's a good principle that means annotations, in a sense, you know, that means that we have to any function has to know whether it's annotation threadable, annotation listable, effectively, or annotation. I don't know what the right term is, but functions might be,
Transparent.
yes, right. Except it's not the function that's transparent.
Right.
It
Yes.
looks through the annotation,
Yes.
annotation ignoring.
Yeah, or annotation rodentical, to borrow one of
Yes,
your favorite words.
right. Uh, right. So I mean, and maybe that's a general principle that we should have. Maybe it's even an attribute that we should have. That I mean, well, what it basically is, a given function might see. Here's the point: the function that does traveling salesman does not want to ignore the edge weights, but it does want to ignore the edge colors.
Sure.
Right. So that function knows that some annotations it cares about, while some it does not.
Yep.
Is that a general principle? I mean, in other words, is there could we imagine a function that's called, strip irrelevant annotations or something that at least conceptually runs before any given function runs? You see what I'm saying?
Should
I mean, it might not
relevant
actually, that
annotations
might
be
not how it
stripped or
actually
just
works.
left alone?
Say that again.
Should irrelevant annotations generally be stripped off, or should they be preserved and left alone?
No, they should not in reality be stripped. But the point is, we don't want to have to write code for every function and every user function and so on. That users don't want to have to write all kinds of elaborate code that deals with what if the entity had a styled of red wrapped around it and so on. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So what I'm proposing is something which at least for user level functions, before you do the processing, well, either that or it is a annotation thread through or something like this that somehow can do the, that somehow, I mean, okay, that's a typical thing you want to do, right? You're basically saying, annotation apply through or something, bad name, f of expa. And what that does is the best thing for it to do is it goes in and masks out and applies f to expa in such a way that expa has only the relevant annotations, right? The annotation, anno mask or something. These are the, those are the annotations that f is going to care about. So it gives f a version of expa that contains only those annotations. But then, in a perfect world, it sees what comes back and it repaints the other annotations that f didn't care about back into expa for the return. Do you see what I'm saying? Shall I repeat?
So
No,
Ken,
I'm not. It's not that I that wasn't. I don't understand what you're saying. I'm that was. I'm not convinced this is useful or even an implementable function.
I'm not sure it's implementable.
Right,
But I think
because
that I'm not sure it's implementable. But what I'm saying is I think this is fundamentally what we want. That is an annotation, for a given function. It is not true. Okay, an annotation, there's two things that are relevant to what happens to an annotation. One, the expression that it's attached to, and two, the function that is being applied to that expression. Do you agree with that statement?
run that by me again.
Okay, so I'm claiming that for all these annotations, let's take graph ones as an example, okay?
Okay.
That there are, it matters both what expression that annotation is attached to and this is a part I don't think we've addressed properly in the past, it matters what function you are applying to that annotated expression. See what I'm saying? It matters in the sense that whether you care about the annotation or whether the annotation should be transparent depends on that function f. It is not a universal feature of the expression that is being annotated. It is a combined feature of the expression being annotated and the function you're applying to it.
Can
anybody else
maybe
comment on this?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense to me that the it's not a universal principle of a annotation like edge weight, whether or not it is relevant to all functions. Some functions it matters to, some functions it doesn't.
Right, except I mean, conceptually, I don't feel like that's useful, or at least a good way to think about graphs, right? I mean, right, if you apply a function to a graph, right, the graph has the annotations inside of it, right? And so the function will manipulate whatever pieces of the graph that it wants to. And right, graph is a raw object. Its contents are completely invisible to everything, right? You can't take parts of it. You can't do replacements, which some people think is a feature.
Okay, so here we've got something which has been annotated, right?
Sure.
If we say edge list of that graph, the annotation is gone. Okay?
Sure, but right, if you looked at the input form of the graph, right, we would see that edge list
Sure,
somewhere.
there'll be somewhere that thing will be there. Right, I understand. But my point is, if you're writing user level code here, okay, graph has been pretty well, this has been done pretty well, I think, in graph. So for example, if I do graph union of this graph with, I don't know, I don't really know, complete graph of 4 or something. Okay, the red is gone. Okay, which is probably correct. Okay.
Yep.
But that was a decision. Okay, but if I was going to write graph union code myself, I might have to have very ornate code to strip those annotations.
Well, maybe you're just choosing a bad example, but I completely disagree with that. Right, because basically you would extract the edges and vertices and union them, right?
Okay, I understand that, but
I think one thing that maybe affects this in terms of how we think of it is that, like, in the case of graph, even though you have a style wrapper there,
right, there's no style wrapper.
It evaluated away, and that style got put into an option.
Sure.
And so when you're talking about stripping off, at the point that, in terms of graph, that you go to do something, there isn't really stripping, at least not in the way I think of it.
Right, it's quite different from graphics.
Graph is a bad example because graph has been well handled in terms of a lot of accessor functions that do the appropriate stripping. Okay.
Right, but the cost, but of course, the cost of that is that you can't do normal Wolfram language things to graph. Right,
because it's a raw thing that has accessor functions rather than having traditional. Okay, so some of these things are more. I mean, so this is an example where it's a total mess, right? Where we don't know how to do this. We've got text structure and text element, but we need to know, how do we mark up a string? Because, by the time we've marked up the string, we can't say string take of that. We would like to be able to have, if this string has been annotated, that's an IPA string, for example, it should still be the case. Okay, what will we like string take to do on that string? We'd like it to do the take on the internal string and rewrap the annotation in this case, correct?
I don't think so. Well, I suppose maybe in this particular case, but certainly not. But certainly not in the text structure case, right? Those things would be completely meaningless.
In the string case, right? String take, sure. But for example, if you did a string replaced all the IPA characters with normal characters, right? The annotation suddenly refers to something that doesn't exist.
So guys, you are exactly making the point that I made earlier, which some of you disputed. Okay, that you need to know both what the data is and what the operation being done is. And only then can you make a sensible decision about what to do with annotations. Because I think you would agree that this type of annotation, a string take should be, treat this transparently.
Maybe.
Okay, well, the other alternative is, let's take this for a straw hypothesis. Every annotation, every operation that's done blows away all annotations. That's another possibility. I don't think one wants that. Can somebody comment on that theory? Like, for example, let's say you've done audio annotation. Okay. I mean, in something like a soundtrack for a video, that's not handled as an annotation, is it? It's handled as a track, correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Okay, so let's take this hypothesis. The hypothesis is every annotation should be blown away as soon as you do any operation on the data. Can somebody think of a case where, okay, when is that a really bad idea?
I think
Simply joining a series of audios that work has been done to annotate them could very simply keep the annotations.
I understand it could, Shadi. We're trying to actually make a theory for what is actually supposed to happen, right? And
Yeah,
people were saying, what's that?
Yeah, but it also probably should keep the annotations.
It should keep the annotations, right? But so the question is, what's the principle, and how do we think about this in a general way? Because the assertion that I was making, which you guys seem to be attacking, was that given the function being applied and the annotation being looked at, that only then can you make a decision. Should you keep the annotation in applying that function?
I think that is a correct statement. I don't know. I think those are both necessary parameters to decide what to do with annotation, right?
So I mean, I think it seems like
for me for that one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly what the principles that people were using when doing the graph functions were, but from what I've seen, it looks like it's basically if you could have colliding annotations, then it throws them away, but if you can't, then it doesn't.
Okay, you could, but you don't necessarily. In other words, you could, if you've colored a node and you have what could be a colliding node with a different color, but there are two possibilities. Either it throws them away on the risk of a collision, or it only throws them away if there's an actual collision. Do we know what it does and what should it do?
In the example you had down below, it could have kept the annotation which was styling the directed edge, but it chose to drop it, right?
Right, but I think we had discussions with Charles where he was saying he wanted to make annotations more kept. But I don't know whether that, I mean, in other words, colliding annotations, conflicting annotations, what do you do? I mean, it's kind of like a diff.
I don't know if we have any functionality like this already, but you may want to specify functions for how to combine, conflicting annotations.
But that goes towards my concept of a general annotation threading system. See what I'm saying? Because what we're saying is, again, I mean, okay, so one approach would be that given the function that's being applied, there is something which, remember, there's different things we could do to the annotations. Okay, what can we do to the annotations? We can, keep them unchanged. We can strip them entirely. Well, see, I don't know, because we can only keep them unchanged, I think. Okay, normally we can only keep them unchanged if a piece of expa is basically being fed without, okay, here's a criteria.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is that it's not always obvious what the annotated thing from the input corresponds to in the output.
Right.
Like if you delete a vertex, you contract a vertex. It's like you have two edges that go into one. Is that one new edge really identifiable with the previous two, and vice versa? If you do the other operation of inserting a vertex.
More extremely, if you annotated 2 as being red, and the 2 is generated by some other means, is it a 2 that should be red or not? Because every 2 in a sense is identical. That maybe is silly.
That's a very odd. Well, but you could imagine it. You make a 2, you annotate a 2 as red, and then you add 6 to it. Is the result red? I mean, that's another bizarre.
Right, that's a good question. Right.
Right.
I mean, in other words, just to show that example, right? We could say style 2, red. Okay, great. Now we say
think you can do operations and numbers.
Right, and you might think, well, right. I mean, you might think that style is an annotation, but I think it's I think it's a generator of style boxes. I don't think style is at all an annotation.
Yeah, I got it. But I mean, so that's an example. Okay, the question is, which operations can drill through annotations? Right? By default, which operations drill through annotations. And that's relevant for unary functions and also, non-unary functions, which is even more complicated, right? Because you might be combining, I think, a function that just takes one object. Well, I don't know. It could be complicated even in that case. So that's really the question. Which operations drill through annotations? Which operations sort of should ignore annotations? By ignore, I mean blow them away.
And there are two different behaviors, right? One is just passing through the annotations, and the other is updating the annotation to the updated expr.
Oh gosh, that's yet another case.
Yep.
Right. I suppose if you join audios, then you need to update the timestamps in the later ones.
That's what Claudio was mentioning earlier.
I mean, maybe the conclusion here is that there kind of needs to be a function by function set of options and things for handling a lot of these.
Possibly
like
so.
For example, if
yeah.
you have vertex contract or something, then maybe I'm going to have to combine the annotations of two edges, and I'm going to need an option that specifies how that's done. But you're going to need a totally different set of options for an audio function or something.
Okay, but let's see if we can't. I mean, okay, so one possibility that comes out of this is that we have a generic set of things called, annotation combiner function or something, or whatever it's called, where at least we can use the same options for, annotation gymnastics for different functions. That would be one possibility. The other possibility is that there are wrapper functions that are used, which maybe is not such a good idea. I mean, maybe the best idea is something where we're simply standardizing the way that annotations work, basically, in these different functions. And we also have to decide, I mean, there are things that work using the annotation function, and there are things that work other ways. And, are there things which should have worked using the annotation function, but they actually work a different way? Like, for example, cell tags.
Well, yeah. Well, we can ignore tag box. I don't know why tag box is on that list. That's I mean,
I think cell tags are fine. I don't think we need to. I don't really see the point of.
Right.
I mean, the only thing is that, for example, okay, here's a good example. Cells have timestamps. Timestamps are a pain when you're dealing with diffing. You would like to ignore them for diffing.
Yep.
But how would that, I mean, it's a general, we keep on coming up with the same problem. In a particular operation, I mean, but that's a case where, you would want not just ignore timestamps, you want to blow away timestamps for diffing. That's a case where you don't want, because I think, in other words,
depends on your definition of blow away, right?
All right. Okay. Well, to blow away / ignore.
Yes.
Okay. Well, so I don't think, I mean, okay. We've got examples here, but is there any, okay. We could operate on the hypothesis that what we're trying to do is simply make, but try to standardize what we're doing. I mean, I don't think the concept, okay, if I've just got a list of numbers and I put an annotation in that list of numbers, I doubt that that's going to be very useful. I mean, do we want,
think with tabular, it might be interesting to annotate piece of data, but just a list seems to be too bare to annotate potentially.
Well, I think we do it but what operations? I mean, okay, we take that list there with an annotation in it. We square the list. What do we want to have happen?
Well, I wouldn't, or right. I would want to get annotation of 60. I would want the current behavior because I don't think there's any other useful thing that power
By
could
the
do.
way, something that I think Shadi saw this yesterday, but something that just drove me crazy. I did this and I thought, gosh, we can use an image as a variable. Okay, so there I was. I did that.
Wait, what?
Well, we've always been able to do that in the past. We can use any expression as a variable.
Well, it depends on not as a variable.
Yeah, not on the left-hand side, right?
No. I mean,
okay, yeah. That's fine.
Right, but then I did this, and it disappeared.
Well, no, it just
no, it did the operation.
Yeah,
I know. I didn't realize that because I typed in something to the power whatever minus whatever, and that was a particularly unlucky case because the -1 made it go to white.
Yes.
Well, minus most things will make it.
Yeah. Well, if you minus one half, right? If you minus
something less than 1.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, okay. Well, whatever. Well, it would be even more amusing. Okay, fine. I just, it's just a funny case.
Right. You wanted arithmetic to work. I mean, I didn't think this was such a hot idea given that we had image add, but you wanted.
It's very cool. It was funny because I was giving a talk to a symbolic computation conference, okay? And I was talking about how sort of, in modern times, everything could be symbolic. And so I tried this example.
Yeah. Yes, you should have used the graphics.
Yeah, right. Okay, in any case. Okay, the statement is being made, tabular might like to have annotations, but list, we claim, doesn't really want to have annotations unless, again, okay, what I think is going to happen is we're going to have a family of options that say what to do with annotations, which may have default settings, but
right. But do you want plus to have?
No, I don't. That's the whole point. I don't want plus to have that. So that means that for deep tabular operations, we can have those options. Look, I think the main conclusion here is that the things we've done with annotations so far are, a little bit fragmented, but not obviously crazy. So the main thing we need to do is, can we pull them a bit closer together and understand where, in other words, rather than, like in geoposition, I don't think there's anything wrong with having the datum as a second argument. See what I'm saying? I just don't think, I think that that's fine. I think an annotation, there's always a datum, but one defining characteristic of an annotation, I believe, is that the thing can stand on its feet it can always stand on its feet without an annotation. See what I'm saying? Whereas a geoposition, even though it has to default it, always needs a datum.
Yeah, I wouldn't classify that as annotation. I agree.
Right, but
I think with geoposition, the case would be more like the timestamp, the fourth element in the first list. You might have a implicit.
Yes, but that's an optional specification. Criterion. It's only an annotation if the object could do just fine without it.
Yeah, and the timestamp affects the kind of identity of the object itself, which an annotation I feel like shouldn't do.
Right. Well, let's look at whether the annotations that we have here are, something like that alphabet thing. I think that's not really an annotation. That thing that says this is an IPA alphabet. I don't think that's really an annotation because it's going to affect all kinds of processing.
Right, but then we're back to edge weights not being an annotation, even though you create them using annotation.
Well, but you can create them without annotation, right? You just give an
Maybe.
edge weight. Okay, it's possible that graph, although it has been the standard bearer for annotation, it's possible that it isn't doing it quite right. I mean, I have to say I don't find it super easy to use.
I agree.
So I think we should, okay, I want to review.
And I mean, I did have a short conversation with Charles and Roger beforehand, and they're, they didn't go into any details, but they're thinking that they need to make a second pass-through graph to improve it. And
okay, well, fine. So let's have this discussion again when they're here. And I think our principles are, we have 3 principles here. Okay, an annotation is defined to be a thing that the thing it's annotating can always do without. For any reasonably computational operation. Do people agree with that criterion?
Yes.
I don't agree with that.
Okay, what's an example?
For example, I would like to have XML trees be tree objects where the nodes are annotated as being
With
XML.
What?
Like here's the tag, here's the attributes.
But maybe that shouldn't be an annotation. That's the point. I'm saying we've got to be consistent. And maybe that's something else. Just like the datum in a geoposition is not an annotation. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think that doesn't want to be an annotation. I think it's very important that an annotation can always be blown away without, with only kind of.
Well, I would have argued on the XML tree case that if you blow it away, it's now a tree, but it would cease to be an XML tree.
I know, which is, look, if you blow away the datum in a geoposition, your missile is going to hit the wrong place or whatever.
Yeah.
Right, but for something like audio annotations, I mean, I don't know what sort of audio annotations we can create, but I mean, are
that's
those...
a question. And when you blow them away, you're probably losing a bunch of work, but you still have the raw audio.
Yep. It doesn't affect the identity of the object itself.
Right, and I mean, with a graph, you might spend a lot of time carefully coloring certain edges. I mean, this is a fuzzy boundary, okay?
Right. Because if you're trying to prove the 4-color theorem, then certainly edge color is an important computational element.
Yes. Yeah, but I mean, this is the question: can we treat annotations as always blow awayable? And if you don't want it to be blown away, don't use annotation, or is it something different from that?
Okay, yeah, I think that's a fair question, and I guess some of that might be reflected in the history of the naming of annotations in graph, where initially they were properties rather than annotations. I think there might be some hint there at them being a bit more essential to the being of graph.
Yeah, look, I think the graph thing is a bit of a botch. I mean, this property thing was a disaster because nobody bothered to find out. I didn't do the appropriate design review, and we should never have allowed that because of properties with entities and so on. Right, so that was a botch. But
yeah, I'm just saying that within graph, what is currently tagged as annotation sometimes as edge weights can be kind of essential to the object.
Right. All right. Look, we're going to have to come back to this.
So Roger just joined us. I don't know if
I'm sorry, it's too late.
Okay.
We're moving on. I'm going to have to go soon. Maybe we should not. But we're not going to repeat this whole conversation. So Roger can listen to what was here already, and then we'll go on from there.
Okay. All right. So this is the thing about, on bracket. Right. We had a conversation and sort of I pointed out sort of how unusable this is. And we didn't make any decision at the time.
I have a comment.
Okay.
We need a logging framework. And the logging framework should be able to spew log files to some place that isn't in your face.
Sure.
And this might be useful if you could just spew a log file out for later analysis, for example. Or it might be useless. I don't know.
Right. I mean, basically, I'm not entirely, since Arnaud was unable to provide any example, I can't really assess, but, I'm a bit suspicious of the claim that things can only be found this way, but certainly he did admit that basically he would run this in the terminal with output redirection and then, scan through
right. So it's a logging story.
Right. So, right. Well, that's which still brings us back to the question of what should on bracket be documented, and or should we change the default behavior of on bracket? Because,
I would be happy with having it dedocumented.
Okay.
Because I think its likelihood of success is low to anything other than a person who knows a bunch of internal stuff.
Right. Yes, and as pointed out, it also will hang your front end.
I know that's why it should work through logging, but I don't know what's happened to our discussion of logging. I mean, I think that it's something like a with logging of Expa and then some log file information. See what I'm saying?
Okay. So if that's...
But not necessarily a log file, right? You can want to log to in all sorts of different ways.
Give me some examples.
You might want
variable.
Say it again.
Sorry, Jeremy, I didn't mean to step over you. But
okay. No, I thought you'd said something interesting. That was probably going to be better than the things I was going to say. So,
but I believe Carlos said a variable.
Yeah, I could. Okay. Right, I could imagine wanting to dump it into a variable. I could imagine actually wanting to print it after all. I can imagine wanting to put it into a file. I can imagine wanting to append to a data bin.
Yeah.
This really smells like handler block, obviously with the better and documented interface, but
what is handler block?
It allows you to intercept messages and apply an arbitrary, and it's in internal context. It's not a documented function.
Yeah.
That sounds
and you can also capture prints that way.
Yeah. All right. Well, I
think it lets but just a quick thing. I think it lets the messages go through though anyway.
Well, you have the option, right?
You don't. Yeah, it doesn't have to. You can modify that.
There is a handler you can use to suppress or change the messages.
Yeah.
Right. There are certain kernel events that you can intercept using handler block to,
So my question will be this. Data bins provide one example of how we, and maybe that's maybe that's what we should do, that we should expect to use the data bin concept for what the logging does by default. Because just sending it to a file, one could export it as plain text, but I don't think it should by default have a plain text syntax, but plain text output, because it just seems crazy to do that. We'll have a bunch of, send an image to it and it's going to be garbage. But it will be useful to have an image in the log.
Well, right, that's a matter of what format we're sticking it out, right?
No, I know that, but I'm saying that what we could do, a data bin, you can bring back a data bin in a variety of different formats, which have timestamps, without timestamps, and so on. It's a fairly well developed and took a long time to develop mechanism. Maybe it's an event series that it comes out at, which I think is one of the options for a data bin. But maybe conceptually, with logging, is logging to a data bin. And that data bin could be resident, could be in the session, so it's effectively a variable, or it could be sort of something that is external or in the cloud or whatever else.
I guess the danger with having I'm not as familiar with data bin as I would like to be, but can that live exclusively locally on the user's machine, or does it automatically?
I think it could. I think it can. I'm not sure that we built that out, but I think it could.
Because yeah, if it just goes to the cloud and people are using
No, that won't work. That won't work.
Dangerous.
Won't work. We know it won't work. But I mean, the whole point is Databin has a lot of infrastructure for doing essentially exactly this, logging things. So the question is, could we build a Databin locally? I'm sure the answer is yes.
However, like local objects and persistent objects could be a local alternative that has
absolutely. But the question is, what's the data structure that you actually put in there? Right?
Yeah.
And the whole point about a data bin is, okay, normally an expression does not have the feature that you can just append onto the end of it.
Yeah. It needs to be a list or something that you can append.
Well, it's a more but it's a thing. It's a more complicated structure, and data bins have the feature that you can have. There is a data bin add function, I think, that just adds to a data bin. See what I'm saying?
Yep.
And I agree that there's the question of where the data bin gets created, but I think this is the right way to do it. I think it's a great idea.
That said, there are contexts in which the thing you really want to do is to just spit it out, to standard out.
Fine.
Also, I might add that there are also times like on open close where, we might want to make sure it's lightweight enough that it can actually handle on open close, and something like data bin add might not be.
Well, I understand, but then we should make it better. I mean,
and actually, one final thing about something as complicated as data bin add, if you use on open close, you could actually maybe get into a situation where adding to the data bin creates more messages than it's actually adding, and so you end up with some nightmare situation.
Right. Okay. This is really a good topic, and I think we're going to be able to nail this one. I think the annotation.
Right, so
topic,
obviously, we should have somebody like Bob.
Yes, definitely.
Anybody else you think we should add?
I think that'll be a good start.
Okay.
I did not know that.
Yes.
Well, there's a reason. It's not documented. I think it was a thing that maybe some combination of Theo and Chris Carlson spec'd up when we were originally doing graphics. And it's come up
in version 3?
For 6.
Okay. Very much more modern.
Yeah. And it's come up because people discover this and say, oh, well, the cloud front end is doing something different from the desktop front end, so we need to implement this behavior in the cloud. At which point I'm like, whoa, wait. I'm not so sure about that.
We need a discussion of this. Talking of things that I didn't know, here's one I didn't know, which I saw on that accessibility page we were looking at. I have always thought we were discriminating against left-handed people by the fact that Command C, Command V, and so on are left-handed command key things. And if you use a left mouse, you have to take your hand off the mouse to do those keys, right? But apparently there is a right-handed version of that. But on our documentation page about accessibility, I could not figure out.
It's only on Windows.
Oh, well, maybe it should say that.
Yeah, well, we don't have very good conventions in the documentation for how how to say, this thing doesn't even have a mapping on Mac. Documenting keyboard shortcuts.
Is there such a thing as a left-handed mouse on Mac other than moving it to the other side?
Yeah, I mean, I've used a left-handed mouse. I mean,
if you use an external mouse, yeah. If you use a trackpad, then I think only a little bit.
Yeah, trackpad, I have to admit, I use my right hand, so I don't really know.
I mean, to be honest, although I've known of these Windows keyboard shortcuts, and not just for our app, but for many applications for ages, but it never occurred to me that their ostensible purpose was for left-handed accessibility.
Right. I just thought that they were sort of easier to. I mean, like Control C sort of makes sense for copy, but Control X and Control V do not, whereas these combinations actually make sense.
But why won't, I mean, there's no insert key on my Mac keyboard, is there?
Right, right. This is a PC. There are extended Mac keyboards with well,
I have an insert. I have an insert key because I have a a Logitech keyboard plugged into my Mac. But
yeah, I have a Mac keyboard that has the delete key, not the normal, backspace type delete key, but the
there's something on the numeric keypad that has a delete.
Yeah, but there isn't anything on my Mac branded keyboard that is labeled INS, where it would normally be. There's an FN key.
Exactly. Yep.
There's a what?
An FN, as in short for function.
Right. It's a modifier for the F keys because Apple hijacks the F keys to do brightness and volume and that sort of thing. And then if you want the F keys
unless you configure it properly.
Right. At which point then right. So it's a question of whether your keyboard is configured so that you have to hold down the function key for your F keys to be F keys, or if you have to hold down the function key in order for your F keys to be the brightness and volume changing things. But either way.
So, by the way, apparently on Mac, Shift Insert is open this ref page, open the selection in a new help page browser. So I have now 3 help browsers floating around my screen.
Given that I don't have an insert key, I can't do that. So
okay, this is because on old Mac keyboards, where the insert key was a help button.
Ah.
Okay. All right. Okay. We should wrap up here. So somebody should probably add paren Windows or something here.
I think this probably works on Linux too.
I don't remember if it does or not. I can look it up, but the standard came from Windows.
Yes, absolutely. Right. Sure. And certainly not all Linux applications, right? Don't try that in Emacs, but
I was about to say that the correct way to copy paste is Alt W Control Y.
No, the correct way to copy paste is select middle click. But
yeah, okay.
Okay.
Right. So, I mean, I don't know if we still want to have the conversation about absolute and scale, but basically John and I think, well, maybe we should just make this Spink everywhere. And because
I think that's a good initial thing to do.
I have no attachment to this, to this behavior at all.
Well, I mean, I think it's worth a little bit of a discussion about whether it's a useful concept. I mean, because the question is, things, right now, thickness defaults to scaled, but some other things default to absolute. And it will be nice to be able to put scaled or absolute, and know that you're getting, without having to look it up, so to speak, know that you're getting the thing that you say you want to get.
Well, so a weird thing is that you would think that thickness and friends are always scaled, but there are values you can pass in that aren't scaled.
All right, okay. We need to talk about this. This is more complicated.
Okay.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys.
Okay.